Welcome to the Vault Podcast, classic music reviews, presented by IV Creative. Now, here's your hosts, B. Cox and the crew.
Greetings and welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to another edition of the Vault Podcast, classic music reviews, presented by IV Creative. It's a perspective of the classics from a fresh point of view. We appreciate you for taking your time and lending your ears to our perspective. You could be anywhere listening to anything, but you're right here with us, so we thank you. With you today is yours truly, B. Cox, and of course we're still in lockdown and quarantine, and some signs that things are tending to be lifted as far as the restrictions, as far as the stay-at-home orders here for COVID-19, but we're still here in the crib, still producing things and still making things happen here for the Vault. Shout out again to my crew who hopefully one day will be back with me once again once this all settles down, but we're going to continue to pump things out. And of course, we appreciate y'all for listening in to us, for subscribing, to listening, to sharing, to see everything continuing to grow here with the Vault, man. We do it here all for you as we continue to chop it up over the classics. Just a shout out to all the listeners in the United States and worldwide. Of course, the check-ins coming from here in the USA, United Kingdom, Canada, Sweden, Brazil, Japan, South Africa, the Netherlands. Shout out to the Dutch, Australia, Norway, Germany, Denmark, Poland, Spain, Taiwan, Italy, Mexico, Thailand, France, Belgium, Chile, Armenia, Colombia, Estonia, Greece, South Korea, Turkey, Kenya, Serbia, Romania, Portugal, Malaysia, Switzerland, among others. We want to thank y'all for checking in with us here with the Vault this month. As things continue to progress, we do everything here for y'all and continue to give you the classics of your life and all the classic music that has come out over these last 20, 25, and 30 years. And of course, we have a good one today. We go back to 1990, straight to the West Coast, to one of the architects of the West Coast sound and West Coast hip hop, especially in the new age. We are talking none other than Ice Cube's America's Most Wanted, the debut album of Ice Cube, his solo debut, released May 16th, 1990 on Lynch Mob and Priority Records. This was Ice Cube's debut after leaving the rap supergroup NWA, who released Straight Outta Compton in 1988, had their world tour in 1988 and 89, and due to a dispute that Ice Cube had with Ruthless, primarily stemming from a contract dispute drawn up by Eazy-E and Jerry Heller, decided to go out on his own for his own solo project, and there was a lot of contention regarding his departure, being as though that he was the architect, along with MC Rem, to many of the rhymes that were written. These rhymes that were written mainly for Eazy-E, but then also primarily sometimes for Dr. Dre. Now, Dr. Dre and DJ Yella were the ones who handled the production on the NWA albums, but it was up to Ren and Cube to write the lyrics, and many of the lyrics that you hear, including the classics ones from Straight Outta Compton, came right from the pen of Ice Cube. And he had been already a established MC and writer throughout the California, Southern California, LA hip hop scene for a while. When he joined NWA, he was the one who penned a lot of these lyrics along with MC Ren. Now, he felt like he wasn't getting his due. The contract he felt was not up to snuff, so therefore he decided to leave and wanted to go out on his own. So it came out with America's Most Wanted, released in 1990, released May 16th, 1990, recorded on Green Street Studios in New York City. And this is an interesting tale that we'll get into a little bit, how he attended recording this in New York and he relocated to New York to record this album. There's a backstory to speak about as far as what happened with the recording of this album and how it came about. Producers on this, of course, were the Bomb Squad, who is Public Enemy's production team, who crafted many of their hits in the late 80s and the early 90s. They linked up with Ice Cube to do this album and collaborated as well with the Lynch Mob and also Sir Jenks, who co-produced many of these tracks on the album with the Bomb Squad, creating a very unique sound for this album, coming out being one of the biggest solo rap albums of that era, especially in LA hip hop and Southern California hip hop. Ice Cube following in the steps of NWA, and as well Ice-T, who released Rhyme Pays back in 1987. Going with this, it was recorded between January and March of 1990. He moved very quickly to get this album out and had it produced in Green Street Studios, worked alongside with Chuck D and also Flavor Flav, who appear on guest appearances on this album. He also had guest appearances, of course, the first time that many of us heard from Yo-Yo, one of the dopest female MCs ever, and definitely a pioneer in West Coast female MCs. She brought a flavor of being featured on the track It's a Man's World with Ice Cube on this, and we would hear from Yo-Yo as the years started to go around, and she carved out a niche for herself and made a legendary career. But America's Most Wanted, released in May of 1990, this was his debut album. So the story sort of works like this. In 1990, after Ice Cube left NWA and was looking for his own record deal, he decided to leave. And of course, he was the biggest part of that group in terms of the MCs. He was the most skilled MC. He had the best pen. He brought really the dynamic that made Straight Outta Compton such a classic, because the lyrics that he penned were groundbreaking. They were harsh. They had social and political themes to them. It was educated. It was entertainment. It was edutainment. So he decided to leave, and NWA decided to go on without him. And there was some tension, of course, between the two of them. You'll see that some of that in this album, but more so in the next album, after NWA released 100 Miles and Running, where they dissed Ice Cube, and Ice Cube then responded with No Vaseline, which appeared on the next album, Death Certificate, which came out in 1991. When he released his original album and was looking to construct an album, what Ice Cube wanted is he wanted Dr. Dre to produce his next album. He wanted Dre to do America's Most Wanted, but that move was vetoed supposedly by Jerry Heller, and also Eazy didn't want Dre to do the album. Dre himself, reportedly, according to Cube, wanted to produce the record, but it was way too crazy of a breakup with NWA, and Jerry Heller and Eazy, feeling spurned by Ice Cube leaving the group, decided to nix the idea of Dre producing Ice Cube's album. Being that what it was, Ice Cube decided to leave and was going over to the East Coast, and actually went, it was in 1990, to go over to New York to Def Jam's studios and offices in New York City. Now, he had a meeting set up, and Cube's management contacted Leor Cohen, a Def Jam executive, and also East Coast producer Sam Seaver. Sam, who helped produce New York's groups Third Base's their debut, the Cactus album in 1989. He had an interest, and Cube wanted to work with him, so he wanted to be able to have an opportunity to get him to work as a producer. The story is that when Ice Cube, and this is a story from OkayPlayer talking about the 30-year anniversary of America's Most Wanted, Ice Cube touched down in New York, got to the Def Jam offices, and Sam Seaver was nowhere to be found. As luck, or as they say, fate ended up happening, Cube ran into none other than Chuck D, who was the leader and the front man for Public Enemy, and Public Enemy was on Def Jam at that time, and they were working on an album at that time, which was Fear of a Black Planet, which we reviewed a couple of episodes ago. Chuck saw Cube, they chopped it up, and decided, Chuck told him to join him at Green Street Studios in Manhattan. And what happened, that meeting turned into where Cube recorded his guest verse for Burn Hollywood Burn, a track on Fear of a Black Planet, which also featured Big Daddy Kane. They released that as a single on Fear of a Black Planet, and that was Ice Cube's first appearance on Wax, and he hadn't yet had a record deal, and it did drum up some anticipation of what people thought Cube could do by himself as a solo artist. Now, during that recording for Burn Hollywood Burn, Cube was introduced to the Bomb Squad. That legendary and also innovative production style sort of piqued his interest. So Cube, at that point in time, was looking to try to find a producer and couldn't meet up with Sam Seaver, so decided to talk to the Bomb Squad. So the Shockley brothers, Eric and Keith Sadler, decided to offered him to not only produce not just a track or two, but to also to oversee the album's productions in its entirety. Now, along with that, what Cube did and his producer, Sir Jenks, did, they worked over the next few weeks, Cube and Jenks, along with the Bomb Squad, to dig for samples in a warehouse in Long Island, to look for samples in order to be able to get things to construct the production for this album. Now, this took a little bit of time, and then afterwards, what they did was come up pretty much with about 2 crates. And if you think about the record crates, they're pretty big, about 2 crates worth of albums that they would use with samples that they pretty much used to construct this album. This is a little bit different for Jenks and Cube because they were 2 kids from Cali. They were coming over to the East Coast to produce an album, which back then people from different coasts and different areas didn't necessarily collaborate with each other. It's not like the way it was now or even later on in the 90s where you had artists from all over, West Coast artists with East Coast artists after the whole East Coast, West Coast beef and troubles, and people from down south doing with rappers from up north and the Midwest and so on. So they got a crash course in the Bomb Squad method of production and also of recording. While they were there were many other rappers there that they ran into, rappers such as Busta Rhymes, Redman, EPMD's Eric Sermon, also Big Daddy Kane, that pretty much lent themselves to the recording of this album and, lent their hands, offered, feedback, and also created sort of like a camaraderie with Cube and Jinx while they were there. This was like the first integration between East Coast and West Coast rappers and producers and groups that lended to have this project put out. And what it did was sort of break down the territories and also break down a fact, because at that point, a lot of New York rappers sort of looked at Cali rappers as inferior. And what this did was sort of help to break down those walls when they saw how skilled that Cube was and how dedicated that Jinx was to getting this album produced and out. So they worked on this in Green Street Studios and recording in 12-hour sets. They would go through and record and made this album, had this done generally in about 2 months, which for an album like this, for even back then, to record an album, have it produced and ready in 2 months to be released a couple of months later is a pretty overwhelming task when you think about it. It ended up coming out. Public Enemy and the Bomb Squad had a very large influence on this, and this came out with America's Most Wanted. This was really Cube's first chance to take his sound, his style, and also rap about the things that he wanted to rap about. Once he was able to secure his deal and record his album, he wanted his imprints all over this album, and you can definitely hear that. What you hear is a lot of NWA Cube, but what you start to see, what you would see in this album and in albums that followed afterwards, is really Cube's street knowledge and also being able to paint stories, not just from South Central LA and Compton and Southern California inside of the black community. Many of the things that we talk about, we talked about Southern California and the hoods and the ghettos back then. Things like, of course, like drug use and drug dealing, gang activity, killings, shootings, poverty, all those things. What he did was sort of give you a window when he did America's Most Wanted into life in the ghetto. But it wasn't just strictly just about life in the ghetto and how things were, as if it was sort of normalizing it. What he did was paint it in the context of how that fit into the rest of America and how it fit into American society. That's what made this album so critical and so important, because what you saw throughout this is socio-political commentary by Cube. And if you listen to the album sort of just at the surface, you sort of hear something and you won't really dig into it. But the more that you dig into this album, you dig into the lyrics and you dig into the themes that are being done, even with the sampling and the samples that were chosen by the Bomb Squad and Sir Jinx in producing this album. You start to see just beyond the surface level. There's a whole lot more there. And as you listen to Cube and as you hear a lot of the things that he started talked about, he became a lot more politically conscious. And what he wanted to do was to show America how much of the mirror of what Black America looked like in its ills. And not just the role that Black people and the people in the community played in by making it this way, but how the choices of politics and racism and discrimination played into it as well, from the criminal justice system to funding for the public, racial profiling to police brutality. All those things sort of mixed into one. So what you had was an album that was crafted very carefully and went to show a message that just beyond the surface level wasn't just gang banging and drive-by shootings and all the things that you associate with Southern California, LA hip hop being so based in the ghetto and ghetto-based music. It really had a message into it. Now, what further complicates this is that he was very heavily criticized, Cube was, in regards to some of the misogynistic content. And rightfully so, which we understand that this was a different time. And when you talked about some of the things that came from the censors and government officials and people who were critics of rap lyrics, they would always cite people like Ice-T and Ice Cube and Tupac Shakur and a lot of the stuff like 2 Live Crew. They would talk about some of the misogynistic content, which is rightfully so. But what Cube had was just more to just beyond misogynistic content, and he toned that down in some of his later releases. There was much more of a message behind it, and that's the reason why this album is so important. As a matter of fact, Cube had an interview with ABC News that he did right around the release of this album on ABC News where they did a feature on Ice Cube and America's Most Wanted and the way that he grew up. Now, this album was very successful, and it's interesting because there weren't really a lot of singles that were released on the radio. This was not very heavily promoted. The content was considered to be so raw and so explicit that radio couldn't play a lot of the records that Cube had. And despite that, he still had success with this album going platinum, mostly out of word of mouth and out of the respect in the community for people knowing what Cube could do. He was still able to have success, but he had an interview with ABC News in 1990, right around the release of America's Most Wanted, based on him, his community, the message he was trying to get out. And here's just a few clips that you see with Ice Cube and the interview that he had with ABC News, what he had to say about America's Most Wanted, about him, and about what he was trying to do with his music.
You can't with the criminal, rapping over gangster shit. First I load the clip and then I make the hit.
Ice Cube sees himself as a social commentator.
Niggas are crazy.
His music is a chronicle of the killings and the drugs and the poverty in parts of Black America.
Yeah, I got it going on. A nigga that's living in the city or the criminal zone. One time can't keep the law and order, because everybody's going crazy for a quarter.
I like to show the black community, I like to hold a mirror up to them and say, look what you're doing. Look, how can you get yourself out of this situation, or do you want to get yourself out of this situation?
All you motherfuckers in Houston is most wanted.
You sing a lot about violence in the community.
Yeah,
You've seen violence firsthand?
most definitely. Most definitely. Yeah, it's like, out of all the kids I grew up with, at least 13 of them are dead. And that's before they even reach 21. I just turned 21, so, I thank God that I've reached 21.
The fact is, a lot of black kids don't. The leading cause of death among young black men in America is homicide.
It's like a war on black young males with baseball caps and T-shirts. I'm an endangered species myself.
So Ice Cube wrote a song called Endangered Species.
Cocaine, it was plain and simple. The 9mm went to the temple. What the sound of
About what he sees as white police brutality and about how black kids kill other black kids to settle scores they can't even remember.
These kids out here that's fighting in the street are fighting over stuff that happened in 72. You know what I mean?
One kid kills another kid, his friend goes...
retaliate, boom, boom, boom. Now they lifelong enemies.
Yeah.
And the kids that's growing up, you just known you're supposed to hate them.
You don't even know why at this point.
You don't even know why. So this is like a retaliation. A drive-by shooting is about to happen.
when I got a sword off, bodies are hard off. It's a shame, and niggas die young. Blood to the light side, it don't matter none. It'll be a drive-by homicide, but to me, it's just another tale from the dark side.
Who's the light side? What does that mean?
The light, the white side.
The white side.
It tells from the dark side, it tells from the black side.
You don't think white America cares about what's going on?
No.
You really don't?
No, I really don't. Not until it started hitting home. I remember I used to be right here every Sunday.
This is home for O'Shea Jackson.
Right here, playing football in the street.
This is where he grew up, a section of South Central Los Angeles where the lawns are manicured and the streets are clean. Looks like a pretty nice middle-class neighborhood.
Yeah, that's what makes it so dangerous, because it's so unpredictable.
What do you mean?
I know a guy that got shot right over there.
Are you serious? It looks like Beaver Cleaver lives up the block there. You know?
Looks like. Beaver Cleaver wouldn't step foot in here after dark.
That ain't the point.
But the real-life victims of black violence and black alienation overwhelmingly are black kids themselves.
There's more good kids out here than there are bad kids. And that's what we showing the kids. Yo, put that down, put this up.
So there you have it. The talk as far as with Ice Cube and what it was he was trying to do with America's Most Wanted. And you hear that throughout this album. And as Cube went on, and even after this, when he converted to the Nation of Islam, you could see that he started to tone down a lot of the misogynistic things that were happening in America's Most Wanted. But you can't ignore the commentary that happens without here. And here we are 30 years later. We talk about a track like Endangered Species, which we'll get to the tracks in just a second. I mean, here we are, Ahmaud Arbery. We talk about things like Freddie Gray, things like Alton Sterling, Akai Gurley, all these different things that have happened, Laquan McDonald. And it's almost like history has stood still. We talked about so many of these different themes, just like in Public Enemy's Fear of a Black Planet, just like in Dead Prez' Let's Get Free. A lot of the things they were talking about 20 and 30 years ago are still relevant to this day because of the things that are happening. Things really haven't changed that much. And even back then, he was talking about things happening in LA when it came to police brutality. This was even before Rodney King. So even before Rodney King and the LA riots happening in South Central, it was almost like he was foreshadowing things that were going to happen. Like the things exploded racially in LA. And to him, this wasn't a surprise because if you lived in these ghettos and black people grew up specifically in these South Central, Southern California, LA neighborhoods, they saw these things happening all the time. And all Cube was like he was saying, reporting live from the streets, straight from what was happening right there on the front lines. So that's why this album is so important. We're going to get into a little bit about the album as far as where I was when I first heard this. Now, this was not the first Ice Cube album that I heard. I think the first one that I heard in depth all the way front to back was The Predator. But as time went on, I started to dig into Ice Cube's work. When I started to go into NWA's work, and then also looking back, I started to listen to Death Certificate, and then of course America's Most Wanted. I think when I listened to America's Most Wanted, I was probably, I would say in the 11th or 12th grade when I finally heard this album front to back. And I was a big hip hop head. I used to go back and I used to read The Source and also things like Vibe Magazine, Word Up Magazine. And when the 10-year anniversary of this came around, I started to see and go back when they started to go back into the crates and back into the lab to saw that this was a 5-mic album with The Source, which piqued my interest because, back then you took The Source mic ratings very seriously. And when I first heard it, I heard a lot of the things that I'd heard from Ice Cube before. And when I dug into NWA's discography and heard Straight Outta Compton, I heard a lot of the same things as well. And at this point, by the time I'd heard it, Ice Cube had become a huge star, but was going to become a megastar. He had gone just outside of music, but then also was in movies, and his movie career would get even bigger as the next decade went along and the decade after that, to the point where now he's a multimedia and multi-platform superstar along just with music. Hell, people nowadays kids you talk nowadays probably won't even remember Ice Cube as a rapper. He's a movie star and a mogul, but this sort of reminds you exactly where his roots were from. Listening to it, though, I was intrigued by what I heard. You didn't really hear and wouldn't think about West Coast MCs. A lot of them sounded like the way that Cube sounded, but he had a really, really great sound and a great voice as always, man. It's one of the things, like we talked about Chuck D's voice a couple of months ago. Same thing with Cube, man. Cube had a very distinctive voice, and that was one of his greatest assets as an MC, was his voice and also his delivery. I was intrigued by what I heard. Now to just get into the standout tracks on this album, and there's plenty of them to go through. Just off the top, listening to Better Off Dead and that intro of him being led down death row into being able to be executed. But the album kicks off, and you can hear that production by Sir Jenks and the Bomb Squad start to come off the first track of The Nigga You Love to Hate. And the samples of here are immense. Look at the research of this album to see all the samples that were used. Very hard driving, very energetic beats. And that just shows the work that Jenks and Bomb Squad put in on to do with this. But my favorite tracks on here, of course, is The Nigga You Love to Hate, Gotta Love America's Most Wanted, You Can't Fade Me, JD's Gafflin. Now, this is a song that was a little controversial, especially because some of the lyrics that Cube actually used, where he was talking about a tale about him being with the girl and supposedly she coming up and saying that she's pregnant and the kid was his. Now, he, of course, doesn't want the kid. So what does he say? He was thinking about doing? Talking about something. He said he had to kick the bitch in the tummy. Now, lyrics like that nowadays would be reprehensible, and it would really be, he would probably be ran through the ringer for saying something like that. Back then, we don't have the sort of the consciousness that we would have now. It was still a really, really cringeworthy line. I remember when I heard it, listening to it this week, I was like, ooh, damn, he did say that, didn't he? It was really like, oh man, that's crazy that he would say something like that. But it was all the story. But that was an interesting track. The storytelling on here that you hear on You Can't Fade Me, of course, Once Upon the Time of the Projects, where he was talking about going to visit a girl in the projects and didn't realize until he was fully in there that he was in a crack house, talking about the girl's mother coming into the room with a blunt in her mouth, smoking some loud, and her girl's little brother was 3 years old, snotty ass nose, smelled like he had just shit on himself, and he was just like, well, damn, what the fuck is going on? Like, bitch, you invited me over here to some crack house? And then the cops come in and then break the door down because it's a crack house. So of course they're going to be coming in to break the door down to arrest people. But really great storytelling on tracks like that. Like You Can't Fade Me, Once Upon a Time of the Projects. Another track that has great storytelling aspects is, of course, The Gangster's Fairy Tale. What I would describe is sort of like the West Coast version and more explicit version of Slick Rick's children's story, except he used a lot of different images in here, and also a lot of the things with when it came to children's themes and also stories such as fairy tales like Humpty Dumpty and The Three Little Pigs and Mr. Rogers and Sesame Street, and Cube's brilliance in here and taking these things and sort of using these images to translate into life in the ghetto. And God, it was crazy, like listening to that, especially in that third verse where he talks about Humpty Dumpty and the Three Little Pigs talking to the wolf and Mr. Rogers being involved. Really great images and really great lyrics. One of my other favorites on here as well is Endangered Species. And this, to me, I think is probably my favorite track on this album. This features Chuck D. As you know, they were very involved. Public Enemy and the Bomb Squad were very involved with this album. Chuck D giving one of his greatest feature verses, I think, on this in the third verse. But this is probably one of my favorite verses from Cube as well, with Endangered Species. He goes to talking to two different aspects, as they mentioned in the interview. One, police brutality in the hood, and of course, the violence against black men, sometimes just and definitely unjust, and the fact that police brutality and misconduct was very prevalent in the hood at that particular time. Then also the other part of it was taking, of course, the violence against each other in these black communities, where, as Cube mentioned in the interview, you got beefs between neighborhoods that went back decades, and people are still beefing over something that they don't even know what they're beefing about. And if you talk to any community like that, where you have poor black communities and ghettos where they are beefs between people that live a couple of blocks away from each other, but they live in the same neighborhood, but they beefing, but for what? That's probably my favorite track on there because it's hard hitting, it's relevant in terms of the content, and also great verses by Cube and also by Chuck D. Now, there was an appearance on here by Flavor Flav. Another one of my tracks that I like as well with Flavor Flav and Ice Cube, but I'm only out for one thing. Rolling with the Lynch Mob is another one of my favorite ones as well. And probably my second favorite track on here is It's a Man's World featuring Yo-Yo. Now let's talk about how interesting this was to feature a female rapper on a track with a rapper like Ice Cube. And this is really the first time that any one of us had heard Yo-Yo. The two of them are sort of going back and forth, and it's a classic male-female perspective on the track, speaking about, it's different type of things, and Yo-Yo definitely holds her own on this, and I think a lot of us were surprised to be able to hear someone like Yo-Yo. We had never heard of her before, and she's here going toe-to-toe with Cube on a track, and conceptually, it's a really, really good track, and it's only foreshadowed to what we were going to see with Yo-Yo for years to come, and Yo-Yo made a name for herself through not just this track, but through all the different other tracks she did heading later on into the 90s. And if you've seen the unsung about Yo-Yo, you would know that she had lots of respect in the game because of her skill, that she could go toe-to-toe with a lot of rappers out there. And I think we need to start to give her flowers because she needs to be recognized for what it is that she's done, definitely in the game as a pioneering female MC. The last track on the album, The Bomb, really kind of gets it. And the way that this ends and those last bars, now who's rolling with the lynch mob? And it just ends just like that. To me, this sort of mirrors Public Enemy Fear of a Black Planet, the way that it ended, how that ended really, really abruptly. And it seems to be a signature for what the Bomb Squad did. And also Cube looking to have those last lines, and then bam, the album just cuts off. Who's the Mac? I think that's probably my favorite beat here on the album because of the samples. Samples on there like I Want to Get Down by Fred and the JBs, Hahachi by Lafayette's Afro Rock Band, Humpty Dance by Digital Underground, and T Stands for Trouble by Marvin Gaye. Really soulful track, great brass sound in there, the trumpet sound and sample that really, to me, made that track stand out. Get Off My Dick and Tell Your Bitch to Come In is a really, really short one, really short track, but a great verse there by Cube. What They Hitting For is another good one, of course. I really like all the tracks on here. To me, there really isn't a soft spot on this album or a disappointment on this album, any lowlights. Everything on here was really well done, and the production by the Bomb Squad and Jenks was really great. I think what to me what is more impressive on here, just as impressive as Cube's lyrics, was the fact that the Bomb Squad sort of produced almost in a different style the way they did with Public Enemy. As you hear Fear of a Black Planet and hear some of their later productions, you sort of know that as producers and as groups of producers, we sort of get into a wheelhouse and we stick with that wheelhouse no matter what. Now, the great ones can sort of tailor their production to someone else's style and other artists that they produce with. If you look at a lot of the great producers, they do a great job of doing this. Pete Rock has done it. Dr. Dre has done it. DJ Premier has done it. Large Professor. And the Bomb Squad did this as well. The way that they sort of took and adapted their style of producing and almost sounds, while it sounds similar to what they did on Fear on a Black Planet, it's different. You can tell that there are different elements in sort of the direction that they took to the samples, to the tempos, to the drum samples, to the vocal samples that they used. They really sort of tailored this towards Ice Cube's style, and it all kind of worked. So I think that's what's really impressive about this is the fact that you had the Bomb Squad really be able to craft a similar type of sound to Fear of a Black Planet, but it not be the same. But it was similar enough to know that the Bomb Squad may have done this, but they did a great job of really tailoring this to Cube's lyrics and also to his flow because it all kind of worked out. And for the time, you can definitely tell the tempos, the drum samples, everything else included in this, all was tailored to the way that the style was at that particular time and what Cube was doing. No lowlights for here on this to me. I think this is a well-crafted, really, really well-produced album. And it was a great feat for Cube to be able to travel over to New York to work with the Bomb Squad to get him off to a great start. As we talk about notable quotables, there are tons of them on here, and you heard a lot of them on that interview with Cube. But my notable quotables for me can be the whole song of America's Most Wanted of Tales from the Dark Side, aka Endangered Species. I say that because of the lyrics that are on here. All three of the verses really hitting hard. And in verse 1, you have Ice Cube talking about, of course, the police brutality and misconduct. The second one is basically talking about the type of things that go on in the ghetto. And of course, it's a story about something happening with somebody getting smoked and him having to think about payback. And then Chuck D, of course, talking about things as far as like America as a war scene and him being able to report to it from the front lines. My notable quotable will really come from verse 1 from Ice Cube, where he says, "Peace. Don't make me laugh. All I hear is motherfuckers rapping succotash, living large, telling me to get out the gang. I'm a nigga, gotta live by the trigger. How the fuck you figure that I can say peace and gunshots will cease? Every cop killer goes ignored. They just send another nigga to the morgue. A point scored, they can give a fuck about us. They rather catch us with guns and white powder. If I was old, they'd probably be a friend of me. And since I'm young, they consider me the enemy. They killed 10 of me just to get the job correct. To serve, protect, to break a nigga's neck. Cause I'm the one with the funk in the trunk and funk the police in the tape deck. You should listen to me cause there's more to see. Call my neighborhood the ghetto cause it's house of minorities. The other color don't know you can run and hide. These are the tales from the dark side." Like I said, he was just foreshadowing what was going to come because it's pretty much the same thing what you saw. A couple of years later after this was released, what happened? Well, a year after this was released, we had what happened with Rodney King. And then less than a year later, you had the not guilty verdict by those 4 LA cops, which led to the LA riots, which pretty much destroyed a big portion of South Central and a big part of that part of LA, which was all over the news at that particular time. And I was in the 5th grade when that was happening. So there was really major news of the things that happened from the LA riots as a result of that Rodney King verdict. But there are tons of quotables and stuff on here. You could even listen to a lot of the songs, even listening to A Gangster's Fairy Tale and also Once Upon a Time of the Projects. Like I said, one of the most underrated parts of Cube's early career was him being able to tell stories. And there are really great stories that he tells here. It really shows his versatility and dexterity as an MC to be able to view and also weave these stories in his lyrics about life, pretty much how his life was in South Central and in the ghetto. This is really a big part of what made Cube such a great MC, him being able to do things like tell stories. And you see a lot of that in America's Most Wanted because it was commentary on how life was at that particular time. He, of course, said that he wanted to show a mirror, not just to Black America, but to America by itself. It's like, this is what life is for us. This is what you've made us. And now we get to, as far as talking about the legacy of this album and sort of the accolades that it's received. Now, there are many things that happen. As I mentioned before, this was a 5-mic album in The Source. This was one of the 2 albums that received 5 mics from The Source for Ice Cube. The other was his second album, Death Certificate, which came out the following year, was also considered a classic. Now, if you want to talk about in terms of where this stands in the time that it was in 1990. This has been very highly regarded and has gotten more accolades as time has gone on. This album has aged like fine wine for a lot of people. Now, in terms of some of the accolades that it received, About.com said it was the second best rap album in 1990. Ego Trip said it's 25 greatest hip hop albums of all time from 1980 to 1998. They said that this was number one. Really interesting. Spence said it was number one album of the year in 1990. As far as albums of the year, Village Voice gave it the number 6 album of that time. Of course, The Source gave it a 5 mic rating at that time. And just a little story as far as like how much better it has gotten. Originally in 1990, Rolling Stone, which we know can be less than friendly when it comes to the rap genre at times, gave this album only a 2.5 out of 5 stars in 1990. And Alan Light, who wrote for Rolling Stone, says that the relentless profanity grows wearisome, the Bomb Squad beats lose steam, and Cube's attitudes towards women are simply despicable. Now, considering the time, that review really doesn't surprise me because, as I said, when you look at things on the surface and when you have people that may understand hip-hop but don't really understand hip-hop and also the context in which that music is being made, if you look at it just at the surface, of course you can come up with that conclusion. But he also said that the album was a disappointment. However, later on, Rolling Stone did a reissue of the rating. They raised the rating to 3.5 stars in 1992. So this is 2 years after the album came out. And then they rated it up to 5 stars in 2004, saying that the album had great production and also great lyrics. Now, this just goes to show that as time goes on, that conclusions can change and also reviews and perspectives can change upon music. How one writer thought that it was garbage in 1990, but in 2004, they were hailing it as a classic. Now, also another review written by David Jeffries from AllMusic said that the street knowledge venom with ultra fast funk worked splendidly throughout the album, with every track hitting home. America's Most Wanted is timeless, riveting exercise in anger, honesty, and the socio-political possibilities of hip-hop. Couldn't say it any better myself. And that's exactly why I said you can't look at an album just at its surface and judge it based on that. Because with Cube, he was striving to do so much more. And with the freedom of him being a solo artist, he had the ability to be able to reach just further, just beyond the surface. Now we go to the ultimate test, the test to see whether this stands the test of time, whether it's a certified classic, borderline classic, or just a classic in its time. And you know the answer for me, this is a certified classic, and this has stood the test of time. To see some of the articles and the write-ups that have happened about this for the 30-year anniversary, you can see the legacy that this has and the influence that this also has had over those 30 years. I mean, people can credit Ice Cube with really being one of the biggest solo rap artists to come out of Southern California, especially in the 1990s as hip-hop started to grow larger in popularity. He would carve out a niche for himself and also a spot for him as one of the best artists in the game. And he would prove that over the next decade and a half. And some of the things that he did, you could see, especially with the next album, Death Certificate and The Predator, into also sometimes with Lethal Injection. As that period passed, you saw him get in not just from music to producing, but then also to having his own labels. You saw him start to get involved in movies and entertainment and television shows. And he really made himself into a mogul just beyond what on the surface you would see just as a rapper. He built himself into so much more. But this is a certified classic because this has stood the test of time. And to hear the backstories about this, that sort of adds to the mythology of this album when you understand and know that it was just not just a rap album just talking about life in the ghetto. It was so much more. It was edutainment. It was education and also entertainment. And what we saw from Ice Cube later on, he continued to evolve as an artist and also evolve as a rapper and then also as an entertainer and eventually as a businessman and as a mogul, having a star on the Hollywood Walk of Fame, not just with NWA, but also for himself as an artist and also as an actor and entertainer. So that's America's Most Wanted, of course, released on Lynch Mob and Priority Records. Please make sure you go out and go listen to it. It is now 30 years old. Listen to it, and don't just listen to it on the surface. Listen to it for everything else that it has to offer as well. And that is going to wrap up yet another edition of The Vault. Please make sure you check us out on our host on Podbean, vaultcmr.podbean.com. You can also download, stream, and subscribe to The Vault CMR on any of our platforms. Go to any of our social media pages. You will get to our link tree and be able to see all of our streaming platforms that are available, and of course all of our social media channels. Just to remind you about what those social media channels are, it's at Vault CMR Podcast on Instagram, at Vault Classic on Twitter, and also you can find us on YouTube and also on Facebook, the Vault Classic Music Reviews. By searching us there, on searching that term, you'll be able to find us. Please follow, subscribe on any one of those platforms. We love to interact with our fans on social media. Drop us a DM, let us know what you want to see and what you like about the show. We love, of course, interacting with all of you around the world, and in this time of quarantine, we want to make sure that we give you the content that you're looking for. We appreciate all the support, and if you have a friend, tell a friend, and make sure you tell that friend to tell a friend. Always remember to keep your headphones on and your music loud, but not too loud. And as we close, we like to remind everyone to dream big, because dreams are the basis for creation. Always create, motivate, and elevate, because you were never destined or created to stay stationary in this life. And on that note, we say peace.
Thank you for listening and coming into The Vault. Please subscribe and follow us on Facebook at IV Creative and Instagram at IVECRE8.